Emma stood at the airport security checkpoint, her hands shaking as she held her small carry-on bag. The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly, and the sound of travelers rolling their suitcases echoed through the busy terminal. She had been waiting for this moment for 3 long years. 3 years of working in London, saving every penny, and dreaming of the day she could finally go home to Manchester. Her mother was sick. The phone call had come 2 weeks ago, and Emma's world had turned upside down. Her mother's voice had been weak and tired, nothing like the strong woman who had raised her alone after her father left. Emma had booked the first flight she could afford, which meant waiting 14 days that felt like 14 years. Inside her carry-on bag was something more precious than all the money she had saved. It was her grandmother's old sewing kit, wrapped carefully in a soft blue cloth. The kit was small and worn, with a faded floral pattern on the outside. It had been her grandmother's most treasured possession. And now it was all Emma had left of the woman who had been like a second mother to her. The security line moved slowly. Emma watched as other passengers placed their laptops and bottles of water in plastic bins. Her heart was racing, not from fear of flying, but from excitement. She clutched the sewing kit tighter, imagining her mother's face when she saw it. They would sit together and remember all the stories her grandmother used to tell while she sewed. When it was Emma's turn, she placed her bag on the conveyor belt. The security officer, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and graying hair, smiled at her. His name tag read David. He looked tired but patient, like someone who had seen thousands of worried travelers pass through his checkpoint. The bag went through the X-ray machine. Emma held her breath. She had never thought about the contents being a problem. The sewing kit had always been just a collection of memories and love to her. David looked at the screen, then at Emma. His expression changed from routine professionalism to gentle concern. "I'm sorry, love," he said softly, his voice carrying a northern accent that reminded Emma of home. "These can't go through. The new rules are very strict about sharp objects." Emma's heart sank. "But they're just sewing scissors," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They belong to my grandmother." David opened the bag carefully and pulled out the small scissors. They were old and simple, with worn handles that showed decades of use. To him, they were just another item that broke the rules. To Emma, they were everything. "I understand, and I'm truly sorry," David said, his voice full of genuine sympathy. "But I have to follow the regulations. These scissors could be dangerous in the wrong hands." Emma felt tears building in her eyes. Those scissors had helped her grandmother make clothes for the whole family when they had no money. During the hardest times, when there was barely enough food on the table, her grandmother would sit by the window and sew. She would take old clothes and transform them into something beautiful and new. She would make curtains from old bedsheets and quilts from scraps of fabric. The scissors were Emma's only real connection to the woman who had taught her that love could create something beautiful from nothing. Her grandmother had passed away while Emma was in London, and she had missed the funeral because she could not afford the plane ticket. The guilt had eaten away at her for months now. As she watched David place the scissors in a plastic bag marked for confiscated items, Emma felt like she was losing her grandmother all over again. How could she face her mother empty-handed? How could she explain that she had lost the one thing that connected them all to the woman who had held their family together? She took her bag back with shaking hands and walked toward her gate. Her legs felt weak, and her chest felt tight. She found an empty seat in the waiting area and sat down heavily. The tears she had been holding back finally came, flowing down her cheeks like a river of grief and disappointment. Other passengers glanced at her with sympathy but kept walking. She felt completely alone in the crowded terminal. The excitement she had felt just minutes ago was gone, replaced by a hollow sadness that seemed to fill her entire body. But as Emma sat there crying, she did not know that sometimes, when we lose something precious, we find something even more valuable waiting for us. Emma sat in the hard plastic chair at her gate, her shoulders shaking as she cried. She tried to wipe away her tears with the back of her hand. But they kept coming. The busy airport continued round her, with people rushing to catch flights and families saying goodbye. But Emma felt invisible in her sadness. She stared at her carry-on bag. Now feeling lighter without her grandmother's precious scissors, the empty space where the sewing kit had been seemed to mock her. She had carried that bag so carefully from London, protecting it like it held the most valuable treasure in the world. Now it felt like just another ordinary bag. An elderly woman walking past noticed Emma's tears and stopped. The woman had beautiful, silver hair that was neatly styled, and she wore a soft pull cardigan that looked handwear upon. Her eyes were the color of warm chocolate, and they seemed to hold years of wisdom and kindness. Something about her reminded Emma of her own grandmother. The woman looked round at the empty seats near Emma, then slowly sat down in the chair beside her. She did not say anything at first, just sat quietly, giving Emma space to cry. Her presence was gentle and comforting, like a warm blanket on a cold day. After a few minutes, the woman spoke. Her voice was soft and musical, with a slight Scottish accent. "What's troubling you, dear?" she asked, her tone full of genuine concern. Emma looked up, surprised that a stranger would care enough to ask. The woman's kind eyes made her feel safe, like she was talking to a favorite aunt. Through her tears, Emma began to tell her story. She talked about her grandmother, about the 3 years in London, about her sick mother waiting at home. She explained about the scissors and how losing them felt like losing her grandmother all over again. The woman listened with her whole heart, nodding at the right moments and making soft sounds of understanding. When Emma's voice broke as she talked about missing her grandmother's funeral, the woman reached over and gently took Emma's hand in both of hers. Her hands were warm and soft, with lines that told stories of a life well lived. "My name is Margaret," the woman said when Emma finished speaking. "And I want to tell you something that happened to me many years ago." Margaret's eyes grew distant, as she remembered. 40 years ago, I was traveling through this very airport with my husband. We were going on our anniversary trip, something we had saved for years to afford. He had given me his wedding ring to hold while he went through security, because it was loose, and he was afraid it might fall off. Emma stopped crying and listened, drawn into Margaret's story. While I was waiting for him, I was so nervous and excited that I kept fidgeting with the ring. Margaret continued. Somehow, it slipped out of my hands and rolled under the seats. I searched everywhere, but it was gone. I cried for hours, just like you are crying now. Margaret squeezed Emma's hand gently. I felt like I had lost the most important symbol of our love. I was so ashamed and heartbroken. But my daughter, who was grown up by then, told me something I will never forget. She said, "Mom, the love wasn't in the ring. The love was in your heart all along." Emma felt something shift inside her chest as she listened to Margaret's words. They were simple words, but they carried a truth that she had never considered before. Margaret reached into her large brown purse and pulled out a small notebook. It was plain and simple, with a dark blue cover and clean white pages. She placed it gently in Emma's hands. "Your grandmother's gift wasn't the scissors, love," Margaret said, her voice full of warmth and understanding. "It was her ability to create beauty and meaning from ordinary things. She took scraps of fabric and made them into something wonderful. She took moments of hardship and turned them into lessons of love and strength." Emma looked down, at the notebook in her hands. It felt light but somehow important, like it was waiting for something special to fill its pages. "Maybe it's time you started creating too," Margaret said with a gentle smile. "Your grandmother lives on in the stories you remember, in the love you carry, and in the ways you choose to help others. Those scissors were just tools. The real magic was always inside her. And now it's inside you." Emma looked at the notebook, feeling something warm growing in her chest. It was hope. She realized. Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe the real treasure was still with her, had always been with her. Just as Emma was beginning to feel better, a loud announcement echoed through the airport. The voice was calm but serious, telling all passengers that a terrible storm was moving toward the airport. All flights would be cancelled for the rest of the day and night. People would have to stay in the airport until morning. Emma looked out the big windows and saw dark clouds gathering in the sky. Lightning flashed in the distance, and she could hear the wind getting stronger. Other passengers round her started to complain and worry. Some were angry, others looked scared, and many began calling their families to explain they would be late. The airport workers quickly brought out blankets and pillows for everyone to use. They set up a small area where people could get free coffee and sandwiches. The bright terminal lights stayed on. But the atmosphere felt different now. Instead of a busy place where people came and went, it had become a temporary home for hundreds of strangers. Emma found a quiet corner where she could sit with her back against the wall. She pulled out the notebook that Margaret had given her and held it in her hands. The older woman had moved to a different part of the airport to make phone calls. But her words still echoed in Emma's mind. Maybe this was her chance to start creating something beautiful. She looked round at the people near her. A young man in military uniform was sitting alone, staring at his phone. He looked tired and worried, like he had been traveling for a very long time. Emma took a deep breath and walked over to him. "Hello," she said softly. "I'm Emma. This storm is really something, isn't it?" The young man looked up and smiled. He had kind eyes and short brown hair. "Hi, I'm James," he said. "Yeah, it's pretty bad out there. I'm supposed to be getting home to meet my son for the first time. He was born 3 days ago, while I was still overseas." Emma felt her heart warm. She saw James's face light up when he talked about his baby. "That's wonderful," she said. "Tell me about him." James pulled out his phone and showed Emma pictures that his wife had sent. The baby was tiny and perfect, with little fingers and a sweet sleeping face. James told Emma about how scared and excited he was to be a father. He talked about the letters his wife had written to him during his deployment, and how she had been so brave during the pregnancy. Emma opened her notebook and began to write down James's story. She wrote about his love for his family, his service to his country, and his dreams for his new son. James watched her write and seemed surprised that someone wanted to hear his story. "Thank you," James said when she finished. "It feels good to talk about it." Emma smiled and looked round for someone else to talk to. She saw an elderly woman sitting by herself, reading a book. The woman looked tired but peaceful, with grey hair and glasses that kept sliding down her nose. "Excuse me," Emma said as she approached. "I'm Emma. Would you like some company while we wait?" The woman looked up and smiled warmly. "I'm Grace," she said. "I would love some company. I've been a teacher for 40 years, and I just retired last week. I'm going home to start my new life." Grace told Emma about the thousands of children she had taught to read over the years. She talked about the joy of watching a child's face light up when they understood a new word for the first time. She shared stories of students who had struggled and then succeeded, and how teaching had filled her life with purpose and meaning. Emma wrote down Grace's story, capturing her wisdom and dedication. Grace seemed touched that someone wanted to record her experiences as the night went on. Emma met more people. There was Oliver, a young student who had worked 3 jobs to save money for his first trip home in 2 years. He told Emma about his struggles with money and school, but also about his determination to get an education and make his family proud. Each person had a story. Each person carried love in their heart. Just like Emma did, there was Maria, a nurse going home after working extra shifts to help her community. There was William, an older man visiting his grandchildren for the first time. There was Sarah, a young woman who had just graduated from college and was starting her first job. As Emma wrote down their stories, she felt her grandmother's presence with her. She was doing exactly what her grandmother had done, bringing people together, creating something beautiful from their shared experiences. The notebook filled with stories of hope, love, and courage. Emma realized she wasn't empty-handed after all. She was carrying the most precious gift of all, the ability to see the beauty in every human story. When the first rays of sunlight came through the big airport windows, Emma woke up from her uncomfortable sleep on the hard floor. Her back was sore and her neck was stiff, but she felt something different inside her heart. The notebook was still clutched in her hands. Now, heavy with the weight of all the stories she had collected during the long night round her. Other passengers were slowly waking up too. They stretched and yawned, folding up their blankets and gathering their belongings. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear blue sky that promised a beautiful day for flying. Airport workers were already busy preparing for the new day, and the first announcement came over the speakers that flights would begin boarding soon. And looked at the notebook in her hands. It no longer felt empty and waiting. Now it was full of life, full of human experiences that connected her to people she had never met before yesterday. She thought about James, who was probably on his way to hold his baby son for the first time. She thought about Grace, who would start her retirement with decades of beautiful memories. She thought about Oliver, who would continue working hard to achieve his dreams. As she packed the notebook carefully into her carry-on bag, Emma felt different, stronger, more connected to her grandmother than ever before. She realized that losing the scissors had actually led her to find something much more valuable. She had found her grandmother's true gift, the ability to collect stories and bring people together through shared experiences. Boarding announcement for our flight to Manchester came over the speakers. Emma gathered her things and joined the line of passengers waiting to get on the plane. Her heart was beating fast with excitement. But it was a different kind of excitement than she had felt yesterday. She had been nervous about facing her mother empty-handed. Today, she knew she was bringing home something precious on the plane. Emma found her seat by the window. The elderly man sitting next to her looked sad and tired. He had thin grey hair and wore a black suit that seemed too big for his small frame. His hands shook slightly as he tried to fasten his seatbelt, and Emma could see that his eyes were red from crying. "Are you all right?" Emma asked softly, remembering how Margaret had approached her with the same gentle concern just 1 day ago. The man looked at her with grateful eyes. "I'm George," he said in a quiet voice. "I'm going to visit my daughter. My wife passed away last month, and I've been so lost without her. I don't know how to face the world alone." Emma felt her heart fill with compassion for this grieving man. He looked exactly like she had felt the day before, lost, alone, and carrying pain that seemed too heavy to bear. She thought about all the people she had met in the airport, and how their stories had reminded her that she was not alone in the world. "Would you like to hear a story?" Emma asked gently. Opening her notebook, George nodded, seeming surprised but interested. Emma began to tell him about James, the young soldier who had been so excited to meet his newborn son. She described how James had shown her pictures of the tiny baby, and how his face had lit up with love and hope when he talked about his family. Then she told George about Grace, the teacher who had spent 40 years helping children learn to read. Emma shared how Grace had talked about the joy of watching a child's face change when they understood something new, and how teaching had filled her life with purpose and meaning. She told him about Oliver, the student who had worked 3 jobs to afford his first trip home in 2 years. Emma described Oliver's determination and his dreams of getting an education to make his family proud. She talked about how Oliver never gave up, even when things were difficult. As Emma spoke, George's eyes filled with tears, but they were not the same tears of sadness he had been crying before. These were different tears, tears of hope and connection. His face began to soften, and Emma could see that the stories were touching something deep inside his heart. "Thank you," George whispered when Emma finished speaking. "I had forgotten that there was still beauty in the world. I had forgotten that there are still good people doing good things, even when life is hard." Emma smiled, feeling a warm glow spread through her chest. She understood now what her grandmother had always known. The most powerful thing we can do is share our stories and remind each other that we are not alone. Stories have the power to heal, to connect, and to bring hope to people who have lost their way. As the plane began its descent toward Manchester, Emma knew she was ready to see her mother. When the plane touched down in Manchester, Emma's heart was racing with excitement and nervousness. She had not seen her mother in 3 years, and she knew that Helen had been sick and getting weaker. As she walked through the airport terminal, carrying her bag and the precious notebook, Emma looked round anxiously for her mother's familiar face. Then she saw her. Helen was standing by the arrival gate, leaning on a walking stick but smiling brightly. She looked much thinner than Emma remembered, and her hair had turned completely grey. But her eyes were the same warm brown that Emma had loved since childhood, and they were shining with joy and tears. "Emma," Helen called out, her voice weak but full of love. Emma dropped her bag and ran to her mother, wrapping her arms round her carefully. Helen felt so small and fragile in her arms, like a bird that might break if held too tightly. They stood there, hugging for a long time, both crying happy tears, while other passengers walked round them with understanding smiles. "I'm sorry, Mom," Emma said when they finally pulled apart. "I lost Grandma's scissors. I wanted to bring them home to you. They took them away at the airport because of the new security rules." Emma's voice was full of shame and disappointment. She had imagined this moment so many times during her 3 years in London, and she had always pictured herself giving her mother the precious sewing kit. Now she felt like she had failed the most important test of her life. Helen looked at her daughter with eyes full of love and understanding. She reached up and touched Emma's face gently, wiping away a tear with her thumb. "Oh, sweetheart," she said softly, "I still have Grandma's thimble and her measuring tape. They're safe at home in my jewelry box. But look what you brought instead." Emma pulled out the notebook, now thick with stories and memories from her journey. The pages were filled with her handwriting, capturing the experiences of James, Grace, Oliver, George, and all the other people she had met. Helen took the notebook carefully in her hands and began to read. As they sat together on a bench in the airport, Helen read story after story. Her face began to light up with wonder and amazement. She smiled when she read about James and his new baby. She nodded with appreciation when she read about Grace and her 40 years of teaching. She wiped away tears when she read about George and his grief. "This is exactly what your grandmother would have done," Helen said, looking at Emma with pride and love. "She always said that the most beautiful things we make are the connections between people." She used to say that fabric and thread were just materials, but love and stories were what made her quilt special. Emma felt a warm feeling spreading through her chest. For the first time since losing the scissors, she felt like she had done something that would make her grandmother proud. That evening, Emma and Helen sat in their small living room, surrounded by photos of their family and memories of happier times. Emma told her mother about Margaret, the kind stranger who had given her the notebook. She talked about the storm and the long night in the airport. She shared how talking to all those people had made her feel connected to her grandmother in a way she had never experienced before. Helen listened to every word, holding Emma's hand and smiling. Your grandmother always said that her greatest gift was not her sewing skills, but her ability to bring people together, Helen said. She used to have tea parties for all the lonely people in the neighborhood. She would sit with them and listen to their stories, just like you did. The next week, Emma decided to start a storytelling group in their neighborhood. She put up notices in the local shops and community center, inviting people to come and share their experiences. She was nervous that nobody would come, but on the first evening, 12 people showed up. There was Mrs. Patterson, who had been widowed for 5 years and felt invisible. There was young Tom, who was struggling to find work after losing his job. There was Maria, a single mother who felt overwhelmed and alone. Each person had a story to tell, and Emma wrote them all down in new notebooks. Every week, more people came. The group grew from 12 to 20, then to 30 people. Emma realized that everyone had experiences worth sharing, and everyone needed to feel heard and understood. The original notebook became the first of many, filled with stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Emma learned that sometimes losing something precious leads us to find our true purpose. Her grandmother's scissors were gone, but her grandmother's gift, the ability to weave people together with love and stories, lived on stronger than ever. The end.